Dad decided not to get an Icon Pass this year. Instead, we're making home movies in the garage.
Cut!
But every movie he makes is about skiing. Why didn't you just get the Icon Pass?
Why do you keep bringing that up?
To be honest, I'm a little worried about him.
Welcome. My name is Dirk Sorenson, and today we are going to be talking a little bit about what we're seeing in specialty outdoors. Really, the focus and the key intention of this discussion is really to focus in on sports equipment that we often get to, by necessity overlook in some of our other keynotes. This year, like no other, I think the opportunity for specialty retailers as well as equipment manufacturers in the outdoor equipment space is better than it's been in years. And we really want to dive into many of these key kind of marketplace conditions that I think are favorable for the long-term health of the outdoor sports space. So moving on, what I do want to make sure of is a little bit about myself, and then we'll dive into some different agenda items. So my name is Dirk, as I mentioned earlier. I'm an executive director and sports industry analyst for the NPD Group. On the left there, you can see both my email as well as my LinkedIn profile. Certainly encourage you to reach out to me in either way. I have about 20 years of a background in marketing and product management in outdoor and cycling products, mostly from the manufacturing side. And really my, passion in so many ways is to use data to inform strategy and the tactics that we can use to improve the performance of product launches, sell-through, and just really making sure that consumers are excited about what we're doing in the outdoor space. So a little bit more about NPD. We're appointed, we are a market research firm, and we have services across 19 countries globally. Sports is just one of 20 industries that we track, and it really gives me and many of the other analysts, as well as your account managers and the people you interact with from NPD, a really great floor by which to really understand consumer behavior in terms of retail in the United States and really globally. We do this in a couple ways. The biggest kind of one that we're best known for is tracking point of sale data, and we have about 290,000 retail doors contributing information to us that we analyze to figure out what's happening in sports and our other industries. We also collect millions of receipts from consumers. Those receipts provide us the foundation to do some very exciting longitudinal analysis on consumer behavior. And then finally, we conduct millions of surveys every year to ask consumers exactly what it is that they're thinking about. A lot of this information is going to be the foundation of what I present today about some of the sports industry trends that are hot right now in the marketplace. So the agenda for this discussion, number one, I really want to give you all a background on the overall trends in sports in the U.S. economy that I'm watching to really kind of figure out what bodes well and maybe not so well for us in 2021 and beyond. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face. What are some of the emerging opportunities for sports, and then really diving into two or three opportunities, I think, for 2020 and 2021 in terms of biggest growth categories. So let's dive in. Sports industry overview. So rolling year ending September 2020, this is a graph that really shows our key categories across the sports landscape in the United States. This is all point of sales data, so reflective of actual transactions that happen at the cash registers and online in the United States. And you can see that some of the influences of the pandemic are really showing out here. So activewear down 4% down 4%, excuse me. Athletic footwear is also down 5%. Now where you're starting to see the positive influence of the pandemic in consumer behaviors and trying to figure out what they can do to stay active at home, you start to see growth in outdoor sports, which was up 12%. Team sports equipment is up 8%, and this is largely driven by activities like golf and racket sports, which were kind of socially limited activities, but really allowed people to get outside, maybe with a smaller group of people, and do something for themselves. And keep in mind that so many of the gyms in the United States have been closed this year, and it really drove people to finding these new activities. Likewise, cycling was up 41% this year. Kind of park team, snow sports equipment, just mostly because we track that through seasonal sales, and really the pandemic hadn't really hit yet. And we're too early in this snow season to really start to speak very eloquently and pointedly about what the trends seem to be. We are starting to see the emergence of some categories like backcountry skiing and so forth, but quantitatively, I think you're best off waiting for a future trend presentation from NPD. In fact, Julia Day and Matt Powell will be speaking on January 21st in their keynote, and I'm sure they'll be addressing some of the more recent trends that we're starting to see. And then finally, home health and fitness equipment grew massively, up 54%. And this is a real keystone note or data point for us all to think about. As people really had to switch their behaviors to home using Zoom and Teams, cooking at home and so forth, the investment in home fitness equipment has never been higher. And I think it's a real keystone behavior for all of us in the outdoor equipment industry to start to think about, which is how do we leverage this new behavior of consumers wanting to work out from home to our benefit. So some socioeconomic impacts that I'm watching. So these are a little bit broader impacts that are influencing the behavior of consumers buying and purchasing outdoor equipment. Number one, e-commerce has certainly accelerated. This is all over the news. I don't think this will be all that shocking to you all. But I think what's important is to really look at the details of this. Excuse me, my nose was itching a little bit there. But the real critical element here is looking at first the initial surge of online transactions, which is what this is. This is just merely a count of the transactions, not the size or dollars, but just the number of orders essentially that are occurring, whether it's online, which is this darker blue number, or the lighter blue number down below is brick and mortar. And you can see the surge where, right at the height of the pandemic, 60% increase from the same period a year ago occurring in terms of online. It's settled in pretty steadily now at about 20% higher than in the same periods of last year. The two V's that you see in the graph really are worth thinking about. The downward V is what when Prime Day occurred in 2019, but didn't anniversary this year, and you can see that negative impact, pretty significant. That upward V over to the right of this graph really represents now Prime Day 2020. So you can see the real power of just that one, 3 or 4 day event in driving online transactions. The key takeaway, I think, for all of us in outdoor is to really understand that online is here to stay, that COVID really kind of accelerated that and invited new audiences to the party of purchasing online. I'd really like to have you all think about the fact that now these learned behaviors, particularly in older Americans, is a little bit more permanent. So now how do we adjust and make sure that we're using online activity, whether that's e-commerce or social media, to reach out to our consumers in more effective ways? This is a fundamental keystone of where we need to be. And, I know Matt has, who will be speaking on the 21st, has an incredible understanding of these behaviors, and I'll leave it to him to really dive deep into this. Another area that I really focus on is demographic shifts in the United States. So if you really look here, this is a bit of a noisy graph or table, but is very, very meaningful. So across the bottom where you see LT from 4 to 100, that's the age of the person. And what you see in the blue lines in the graph is the growth by percentage of each of those ages between 2015 and 2025. And so what the takeaway here is that millennials and boomers by age group are growing rapidly, and almost every other age cohort is shrinking. You will notice that children under 8 years old is now also growing. So what's going on here, and why is it important? Effectively, millennials are now at the age where they're buying homes, they're getting married, and they're having children. So you're seeing that having children portion reflected in two parts of this graph. Over on the far left, where you see those children under 8, and then also that big peaky boom with millennials between the ages of 28 and 45. That age is really, really key for us to think about. And the reason it's important for outdoor is because this age cohort is in a massive life transition where they're moving away from things like, going to bars and living in cities to maybe moving to the suburbs and looking for weekend activities that are family friendly. And there's nothing more beneficial or more kind of akin to suiting the bill for those consumers than outdoor activities, whether that's recreational camping, maybe going, paddle sports might fit the bill, day hikes fit the bill, some other outdoor activities like cycling. They all kind of sit in that sweet spot where millennials are now really looking at that activity as a centerpiece of their day in and day out activities, like really no other period in their age period and age growth. Boomers are also worth thinking about. Here's a group of individuals who have had in the past a healthy, positive experience with being in the outdoors. But what is important here is now they're starting to flock to creature comforts, assistive technologies. One of the bigger growing categories in all of sports that we're seeing right now is e-bikes. E-bike sales have grown 100% plus year over year for the last 3 or 4 years. And the boom has really, really accelerated this year due to the COVID crisis and people looking for new activities. So those are two fundamental kind of consumer groups that I'd be thinking about in terms of who do we key in on and how do we grow our business. Weekly exercise has increased during this kind of COVID period. This information comes from our partnership with another market research firm called Civic Science. They're really capable at quickly reading the pulse of activity in the United States through their survey techniques. And what you can really see here is the several times a week growth of people saying that they're going out and exercising multiple times a week really increased in April, and it's really kind of stayed stable now through the summer months. And you're seeing a little bit of decline now with colder weather. But nonetheless, what Americans are starting to say is that they're more interested than ever in exercising and finding those kind of healthy activities to participate in. This is key to me. Workplace shifts to home. So it should come as no surprise to almost every American and probably everybody across the globe that this pandemic has shifted our focus to the home. And nothing says this more than this trip information. This comes from the Innovation Lab and is something that I would encourage you all to reach out to NPD to understand better on. But this is basically the trip the percentage of trips taken to work. And you can see at the beginning of the pandemic, that percentage was down to about 40%. So 60% of Americans had stopped traveling to work and were starting to work at home. And you can see that trip behavior has stayed reduced and started to increase, almost a little bit above 50% starting in October, but then dipped back down in early November. And we're constantly reevaluating and capturing new data points here. But the key takeaway is that basically half of Americans now are working from home that didn't before. Those people have won their commute time back. The average commute in the United States is 27 minutes each way. So people are basically getting back, or half of this population that used to commute to and from work is now richer in terms of time by 1 hour. How are they using that time? Where are they going and what are they doing? These are really, really rich macro trends that we need to think about. Similarly, now that workers don't have to travel to their offices, many are starting to depart from the cities in which they're employed or they go to school. So on the left, you can see places that are receiving inbound arrivals, people moving to these cities. What you'll notice in common is many of them are lakefront or waterfront locations, resort communities. I know here in the state of Colorado, mountain towns like Salida or Buena Vista, they're doing very, very well in terms of inbound growth as people realize the opportunity to move out of cities and create a richer personal lifestyle. Net departures, largely college towns. But the takeaway here is that Americans are now starting to find the ability to move to these communities that support active lifestyles. And again, a really big opportunity for us. So likewise, this remote work trend really has a massive impact on our spending and the way we're looking. So it's the way we live in the workplace. And this summary slide really gives us a little bit of thinking here. So we all are aware that travel has declined, and I think this is another key thing for us to all kind of grapple with. It's not that Americans don't want to travel, it's just that they probably are a lot more resistant, and it's a lot harder to travel by plane. So vacations and the way business travel is occurring is also keeping us a little bit more local. So I think this is a prime recipe for backyard adventure, for people to hike, bike, kayak, backpack closer to home. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not getting in a car or maybe even an RV and driving even several hundred miles from their locations. But what it also means is that they're probably not flying for vacation. So again, a leverage point for us in the outdoor industry to think about. And you're going to see this playing out in the equipment purchases that we're seeing happening in 2020. The spending at home increases we've mentioned before. There's a huge shift towards spending for essentials, home cooking, small appliances, technology for work from home, and really at-home fitness has massively surged. And then finally, there's a lasting shopping behavior that I talked about a little bit in the demographic slide, where consumers now really need to be supported by direct-to-consumer brands, stronger e-commerce platforms, shipping and delivery services, and really online sales that now cater more to the older consumer. One of the bigger trends that I've been following over on the cycling segment is really mobile bike delivery, bike setup, and bike servicing. These are opportunities, I think, for growth in the more technical aspects or the technical categories in outdoor equipment. So let's dive in a little bit more into the outdoor industry. So this is measured by our outdoor industry view, which combines the transactions of large format brick and mortar sports retailers, sports specialty retailers, and sports specialty e-commerce. And you can see it's a $13 billion business. It declined about 8% by dollars. This is, by the way, year to date through September. And 13% down on units. Average selling price went up $30 to $35. What's critical here is that this isn't an increase in the item price, but a shift by consumers to more expensive items. So by super category, what we're seeing here is the real impact of the early impacts of the pandemic. So you can see in March and April, massive declines. You can see outdoor equipment or the equipment categories down 23 and 24%. And you can see massive declines in accessories, which would be things like sunglasses and backpacks. Apparel and footwear all really had challenged early months in March, April, and May. Key selling months, by the way, for our industry. What's the takeaway for me and the pivotal piece that I want us to all think about is the acceleration of growth of equipment sales across those channels. Starting in May, you started to see equipment turn positive. You saw very, very positive results in June, July, August, and September as consumers started to reinvent their home lifestyles to include outdoor activities. So when we think about the channels themselves, though, specialty retail really was mightily challenged. This one channel really saw their doors close, largely shuttered in March, April, and May. And the result was a pretty significant loss here. You can see apparel lost $517 million in share. share dollar value. Equipment was down $114 million in share dollar value. Footwear shifted $115 million away from specialty retail to other channels, and accessories was down $20 million. So these share changes really are on the shift of share percentage or share points. So apparel shifted about 4.5 points a share away from specialty retail to other channels like large format retailers and sports specialty e-commerce. And likewise, equipment was down 2.4 points, accessories was down 2.3 points, and footwear was down around 3 points. Why is this all important? The critical question is this a one-time shift, or is this something that we need to be concerned about, or, and most importantly, what should be done about these types of shifts? And I think this gives us a really right platform, a big question, to start to wrestle down how does the equipment industry and outdoor retailers start to function and profit from these dramatic shifts that I just mentioned in terms of the outdoor equipment industry and behaviors by consumers of entering these sports. So what is the future opportunity areas for specialty and outdoor and the outdoors in general? That is the fundamental question that I think we want to ask and answer as an industry. So to answer that question, let's look at just equipment and accessories combined and start to really unravel at a deeper level what happened. So this is about $4.5 billion of that $13 billion that I mentioned earlier. Units down 17%, but importantly, that average selling price went up to $36. So a big shift in categories away from what people have normally purchased to something more expensive. So what does it look like at the equipment level? You see a $791 million shift away from outdoor specialty and towards athletic specialty and sporting goods and sports specialty e-com. Why did this happen? In March and April, outdoor specialty retailers were largely shuttered. Athletic sporting goods, specialty sporting goods, and sports specialty e-commerce had the benefit of having a 24-hour door open, which was their e-commerce portals and so forth. And they had a little bit better ability to flex to the new rules of retail that were imposed March, April, and May. Bigger organizations being able to read the regulations at the state level and really adjust and adapt a little bit more swiftly than we saw with outdoor specialty retailers. So what does it look like by month? And I think this is really kind of a critical takeaway here. So I looked at this by month, and you can see that the orange reddish line at the bottom, which represents sports specialty, you can see those 44% declines that happened in March and April, and then we started to see a rebound. The biggest recipient or benefactor of what's happened has been the ongoing growth of sports specialty e-com. So this really underscores the need of having some sort of online presence. Now, I would certainly urge you to have an e-commerce storefront if you don't already have one, or a strategy. And that can be using things like Instagram to create social networks and influence and create a sense of community around your brick and mortar storefront or your brand. It doesn't necessarily need to be e-commerce, though there are profound benefits from going in that direction. And I think everyone really needs to take a bit of time to think about what your future strategy is, given that these transaction levels are up 20% across all the categories we track, and you can see the power that is kind of aggregating towards sports specialty e-com. So, excuse me. So, which categories have done well? This one is the top 10 growing categories this year, and really, what you see here is that kayaks. These are the biggest sports specialty retail categories. Kayaks number 1, backpacks number 2, though suffering a bit of decline. Bottles and insulated containers down 19%. Sunglasses down 29%, and on. You kind of take your time and read this, But one of the critical ones that I see jumping off this page is that 4 of the top 10 categories here are paddle sports categories. Real critical, big growing category. Why is this happening? And I think the next set of slides will let us really determine and dive into why that is occurring. So let's look at paddle sports as a deep dive. So these are the subclasses in water sports that we track at NPD. And what you're seeing here is, and this is a little bit of an expansion. We're looking at the performance across the outdoor industry. You can see recreational kayaks, by and large, the number one category. All of the categories experienced dramatic growth this year, with the exception of 2 items: water sports swim goggles and other water sports items. So these are like pool toys and that sort of stuff. Why is this happening? Frankly, pool closures. Pool closures really kind of diminished the demand for water sports swim goggles and pool toys, but gave the opportunity for products like recreational kayaks, personal flotation devices, stand-up paddle boards, and so forth to really, really grow and thrive in this age. So now we have a new captive audience, and really it's up to us to start to think about what do we want to do to keep these people active and engaged in 2021 and beyond. I think it's fair to predict lower demand on many of these items merely because households only need so many of these. You only need one whitewater kayak. You only need one touring kayak. You might need one stand-up paddleboard per person. Once that kind of threshold is made, now we have to start thinking about add-on sales and really maintaining the activity so that people really thrive and enjoy the outdoors. So I thought it was really interesting to look at stand-up paddleboards and when it grew as compared to recreational kayaks. And what you could see is that stand-up paddleboards, SUP, grew at about 4 times the rate of kayaks during the month of May through July. There's a couple reasons this might be happening. So, my hypothesis was that rec kayaks, the inventory just really kind of got sucked out of the market, or the newness of stand-up paddleboards and the ongoing marketplace interest, marketing, and storytelling around that activity is a little bit better. Nonetheless, you can really see stand-up paddleboards has experienced a resurgence in growth in this era. So, number one, on inventory availability, in fact, stand-up paddleboard inventories were better than rec kayaks. You can see that in this graph. The upper graph is stand-up paddleboard percentage increase year over year in terms of inventory. You can see in March, inventory levels were up 344% from the previous March. So manufacturers and retailers are already betting pretty strongly on this category. And consumers really rewarded the inventory availability of this category with purchases. But there's got to be something more into this. And so what I did was I took another look at just stand-up paddleboards. And one of the key new trends in stand-up paddleboards is really, I would say it's new, but I think it's really reached its maturity, which is this idea of inflatable stand-up paddleboards. Why is this important? They're easy to store for consumers, retailers, and manufacturers. They're easier to ship for manufacturers and retailers trying to serve a distance consumer. And frankly, they're easier to travel to and from lakes and waterfront properties. So all in all, this is a really thriving category that we should really look at as a model of success. The underlying trends, strong marketing stories, it's easy to transport, it's easy to use, the burden of learning is a little bit lower. All of these things really were great conditions for the stand-up paddleboard movement to really take off. You'll look over on the left, and what you see is the darker gray line compared to the blue line is the non-inflatable growth. And you can see it grew about 40%, but where you saw the massive growth here is in inflatable stand-up paddleboards, going from, 3 million to 13 million, just like that, in just the course of a year. So really big, healthy growth in that inflatable category. So another area that we saw a lot of growth in this year was actually in car racks. This was one of the top 10 categories of growth for the brick and mortar sports specialty retailer. And let's dive in a little bit and think about car racks as an opportunity and what it can really teach us about a lot broader category set. So the car rack category grew 24%, up to $161 million. Early in the pandemic, I can tell you that this category is a bit soft. It really didn't react well in March and April. Makes sense as people weren't getting in their cars and going places. But as consumers started to invest in, frankly, bicycles and wanted to get to new trailheads and new places to ride, we started to really see a surge in the purchase of car racks. So what we saw was platform hitch racks, hanging hitch racks, trunk-mounted strap racks, all really growing very, very heavily as a result of people purchasing bicycles and needing something to get themselves out and around and able to go ride, maybe going to their local mountain biking trailhead and so forth. So what's the takeaway for me? The takeaway is that this is just one of a number of categories where we should all be thinking about what is the add-on sale to those natural new install bases that we saw early in the deck. We saw home health and fitness growing really rapidly, cycling growing really rapidly, kayaking growing really rapidly. We also know, looking at the larger channels, that recreational camping is growing. All of these kind of pods of growth, what we should start to ask ourselves is what is the natural add-on that we can sell to benefit from this new install base that has occurred in the 2020 year. Finally, backpacks. You might recall that backpacks had a pretty challenged year in 2020, but I wanted to take a moment to really think about what's going on there and give us kind of the sensibility of really analyzing pretty deeply if this is a one-time occurrence or if this is an ongoing shift that we have to predict and plan for. And in fact, with backpacks, I think this is a one-time occurrence. And let's dive in and I'll show you why. So if you look at backpacks by size, what you'll notice is that the greatest losses really occurred in those day packs. Larger multi-day, and here's what's really interesting is larger multi-day size packs actually grew by 15%. So why is this happening? Let me see really momentarily. If you look at the seasonal trend lines of backpacks, I have the overall sales at the bottom in light blue, and you can see that 80-liter or large multi-day backpack at the top, and you can see when the growth occurred. And you can see June and July, massive growth in these multi-day products where people are really, really embracing and trying to figure out new activities and getting outside and purchasing for that effect. The rest of the category really stayed challenged at the beginning of the pandemic all the way through, with only September showing positive year-over-year growth. So what's going on here? What's really happening is that these day packs that are sold in the outdoor industry retailers, they're also being purchased for people to commute with, go to school with, and use in everyday fashion. We have a number of products in the outdoor equipment space that really have this crossover functionality. We have to be far more sensible about understanding the power of essentially students buying things like backpacks, day packs for book bags, or people buying portable beverageware for everyday use to drive those categories as opposed to looking at that sports enthusiast. The takeaway for me is to really think about which categories are everyday use that appeal to a broad audience as opposed to categories that are really enthusiast-based. There's no right answer. I'm not prescribing that everybody shifts to one or the other, enthusiast segment or everyday segment, but we have to be mindful of what's really driving our sales and plan for what's going to happen next. So what is likely to happen next or happen in future years is, and I don't have the timing. If I did, I would be getting paid a lot more money and probably, working for, I don't know, a bank in New York City. But in general, what we can expect is some return to normalcy where kids will go back to school. People will need day packs for everyday use. And so to me, this is a bit of a one-time event. Now, what might not be a one-time event is for people embracing the outdoors. And I think we want to look at those more technical trends for future growth opportunity. So what are my key takeaways as I kind of finish up and wrap up my discussion with you? First, let's start looking at these demographic shifts as favorable. And many of the choices that consumers made this year were just accelerants of probable trends that consumers are going to make just because of their life stage. Second, outdoor products like backpacks and portable beverageware have a real strong school and commute component, and we need to start planning for those categories that we carry in outdoor equipment accordingly. Third, paddle sports has really surged as consumers were locked out of local pools. Maintaining our enthusiasm to this new base is going to be really, really critical. So we need to think about, as specialty retailers, as stewards of communities, how do we keep people enthused and excited and moving along their learning curve, whether that's on stand-up paddle boards or in kayaks, touring boats, wreck kayaks with the abundance of fishing opportunities that are afforded on recreational kayaks. All of these opportunities really are robust and ready for us to take advantage of. Add-on sales, I think, are a real key area for us to think about. And a lot of times people think about add-on sales as those little items that are placed around the cash register. But I'd really encourage you to think about how those newer consumers are going to start to augment those initial purchases to have a richer, more robust outdoor lifestyle. Start to support that in 2021 and beyond, because I think that's going to be a really rich opportunity where knowledge, technical features, innovations in pricing and distribution could all benefit both brands and retailers. What is the black swan? So there's a book that talks about these once-in-a-lifetime experiences. I feel like, for many people, we're all exhausted with black swans that have happened, whether it's the pandemic or other cultural shifts that have happened really over the last 8 to 10 years with different challenges to our economy and so forth. But I think we want to think about how are we going to emerge from this? And how do we take advantage now of different travel habits and personal habits that people have adopted in 2020? The fact is that people have had a robust amount of time on their hands to switch their behaviors. And those new behaviors have taken hold, whether that's shopping on the internet and e-commerce, to new physical and exercise behaviors that are happening at home, to camping more and being with family and more. All of those opportunities, I think, are long-standing habit switches that we can use to really further our retail and brand experiences and brand performance as we emerge from the pandemic. And then finally, let's consider the outdoor industry relationship to students. I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but so many of the bigger categories that we track here at NPD in the outdoor industry view and across outdoor really have a very heavy component of being influenced by students and college students and people and parents planning for that back to school behavior. So it's a real leverage point for us to take advantage of. With that, I'd like to encourage you to write me any sort of email or follow-on questions at dirk.sorenson@npd.com. A further encouragement is to reach out to us. If you're a brand that we work with, a retailer we work with, or prospective retailers and brands, reach out to me, reach out to NPD, and see how we can help. We are really, really adept at finding those opportunities where we've seen some shift that could benefit your brand or your retail store, and really targeting in on exactly which brands, items, and new trends that can benefit you. And we really would love the opportunity to talk with you at an individual level on exactly what we're seeing in the market and how to take advantage of it. With that, I want to thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in and listen to me talk a little bit about my key trends and what I've been watching in the outdoor industry. Thank you.
So this year, I thought, why not get into shipbuilding instead of getting an icon pass? I just find shipbuilding so relaxing. Definitely don't regret not getting an icon pass. Shipbuilding's way better.